Even the fact that his outer appearance was of a normal elf and that he was a mixed blood of two species. However, Myung didn't say anything. He has a lot of enemies. Basically, devils loathed Merlin. And from what he knew, dragons and elves didn't like Merlin. He wasn't exactly sure of the reason why, but there were assumptions that it might have something to do with the creation of the underworld. From the beginning, how many people in this world would know of the truth behind Merlin and Solomon? They were certain that everything started because of the Lemegeton. In any case, there was no need to rashly take what little is known. I need to end it as quickly as I can. The Sword Bone Trio would need some time to find this place. Myung was planning to get what he wanted and flee during that time. One of the 3 things he needed to earn the Diablos. Got King Orus's throne. If he did, then he would have 2 rings in total, including the Lunatic Sovereign's ring. It would be nice if he could achieve his goal and leave. It would be too risky to bump into them. No matter how strong the half-dragon type species in front of him was, Myung was able to figure out that he was still no match for Sword one of the 10 strongest people. He was about half a step to a full step behind. Although his strength is immensely powerful, there is a limit to impure strength. No matter if he had the blood from both a high elf and an ancient dragon, it was too irrational to want the 2 to be synthesized. If he was to use impure strength endlessly, it would only lead him to harm. It was also the reason why Swell couldn't leave this play for all that long. He probably knew that if he didn't have the blue mushrooms that were grown only at this place, his magical powers would be a mess and he himself wouldn't be able to control it. It would be too much just with Sword One, but if other brothers were to get involved, the results were obvious. It was better to just get what each of them was after and go on their separate ways. What's wrong? Are you not confident? If you are a Dakibi who is faint-hearted, I don't blame you. As Myung kept silent, Swell mocked him. Swell misunderstood and thought that Myung was frightened and kept quiet. There was also the basic disregard for Dakibis. Myung shrugged his shoulders and spoke. The details about the bet is limited to finding a new one, right? Swell looked directly into Myung's eyes. Do you think I'm a niggard who would use something that I already found? If you truly don't believe in me, I will swear on my name. Despite my appearance, elf and dragon blood flows through me. I don't lie. So an elf and a dragon. Dragons were a species that typically enjoyed lying. To be exact, they liked skillful wordplay, but it seemed like Swell didn't know very well about dragons. However, Myung didn't have a broad consideration to point out such things. Even so, isn't it too advantageous for you? You know this land better than anyone else. You would just need to bring back a blue mushroom that you had your eye on. Don't worry. The blue mushrooms last only for 2 days, they wilt afterwards. Since they are mushrooms that are born by the energy of spirit birth, once it ends, their life also comes to an end. It's impossible to have something that I have already looked at. As if it was quite fair like this, Swell made a proudful expression. Myung grinned and then turned his body. I will be back soon. Myung felt his confident as if there was no way for him to lose. However, even when he was at the Blue Temple, Merlin paid dearly for disregarding Myung. He didn't think Swell wasn't greatly different from Merlin. The north side of the Land of Ice was vast. And Swell knew this place better than anyone else. At a glance, Swell might be absolutely advantageous, but there was a time restriction. Until the sunset, there was about 8 more hours left. Since he restricted himself to move after 6 hours, there could only be a smaller area he could be active. With only about 2 hours, it was impossible to search the entire area of the North Side land. On the other hand, Myung was alone, but not really alone. Taken, release all your evil spirits. Oh ho! Are you thinking of winning by the number? I will release my specters. If we dig up the middle point of the underground and collect blue mushrooms a certain size or bigger, we could probably win this with ease. It seems like a nice move. For him to think of me, a sovereign, as a pet, we need to teach him a lesson. Taken ground his teeth. It seemed like Taken still had a grudge on Swell for calling him a pet. At the same time, few thousands of specters spread across the north side of the land. Muyang also released specters and made them start their search with Merduden as the head. It was a gamble. Although it was a small possibility, there was a chance that the Sword Bone trio might notice their actions. However, if that wasn't the case, he would be able to achieve results that exceeded Swell's expectations. I need to take measure for that scenario. However, he couldn't just ignore that low possibility. To limit all possibilities, it was necessary for Muyang to act and change the current situation. Lure. Instead, he needed to beat them to it. For the Sword Bone trio to circle around the furthest path. He thought of a way to use specters to restrict their movements. Wasn't it always better to limit all dangers? This was a desperate countermeasure to protect Swell until Muyang earned the God King Orus's throne. Since the current Swell cannot beat the Sword Bone trio. Conceit of his own ability. It probably was formed because he lived here for so long. At this place there weren't a lot of monsters that could stand against Swell. No, there were just very few monsters. And when you reign as the king of a land, you can become arrogant. However, this place was totally boring. He probably needed some sort of vitality like a bet. Nevertheless, he probably never thought he could lose. That sort of arrogance approached Muyang as a favorable factor. If the Sword Bone trio weren't to suddenly appear and interfere, it would go as he planned. Should Wuhi also help? If it is that mushroom, Wuhi could probably find it easily. Wuhi appeared from afar as she flapped her wings. Fairies normally hated dragons, so even if he was only a half-dragon, she could feel Swell's dragon energy and stayed far away. She waited for Muyang outside and approached him when he appeared. All right. Muyang spoke without much expectation. He truly didn't have any expectations for her. Wuhi. No need to worry, just trust in Wuhi, husband. With Muyang's middle and index finger, he stopped Wuhi's pouted lips. And looked around the front. I might be able to earn the God King Orus's throne more easily than I thought. There was a great price for being off one's guard. Soon, a numerous number of specters started to fly out from his back. As Muyang returned, Swell let out a sneer. Why did you return empty-handed? It is because it is an embarrassing result to even show me. I will show you when you return. In Swell's eyes, it seemed like the Dakibi was trying to protect his last shred of pride. The blue mushrooms could only be easily found by pure souls like the spirits. Only the energy of death could be felt from the Dakibi. It would be difficult to find the blue mushroom by his own efforts, and even if he did, it would be a humble size. It would also be quite fun to see that face distorted. As if he was going for a walk, Swell left the cave. After not even 10 minutes he returned. With a blue mushroom the size of his body. He was trying to deeply humiliate him, and sure enough, the Dakibi's expression instantly changed. However, that expression was filled with ridicule than shame. For him to ridicule. Is it only that big? Only. Did the Dakibi turn mad? This big of a size would at least be one of the top sizes. There was no way for a Dakibi who strongly smelt like death to find something bigger than this. However, the Dakibi drew a talisman, and as he used it, a blue mushroom that seemed to be at least 2 m appeared. It was real. The blue mushroom was real. Even Swell rarely had seen a size that big. Naturally, his eyes widened and his body shivered. This where did you find it? I won. As you promised, give me the God King Orus's throne. No. Not yet. If you want to earn the God King Orus's throne, you must win against me 3 times. Swell was desperate. He even expressed a strange heat. He is crazy over bets. Muyang let out a big sigh. On the contrary, the defeat seemed to have provoked him. That desire he couldn't force a stop. However, he couldn't just accept it either. Let's add to it another demand. Fine. If you win 3 times from me, there is no reason for me to reject another demand. It was good that he accepted an assertive demand. It was because he wanted to continue the bet that much. Muyang didn't mind it and spoke. I want to see Orus's enlightenment. That? Swell was surprised. It was surprising to know that a Dakibi also knew of it, but he had no idea what another species would use it for by looking at it. Oris was a transcendental species who placed a world tree himself. In the Twilight Era where the elves gained supremacy. At the time, Oris was active as an emperor who led the elves. It was known that he, one who had a fighting power close to a god's rank, narrated all kinds of enlightenment in one book before his death. And among them there was also enlightenment about swordsmanship. Oris had used different types of equipment, but he was known to be most exceptional in his swordsmanship. There is a possibility that Swell might have the book that has his enlightenments written. I am lacking in sword depth. Myung felt it. The black shadow. The existence in his dream was strong and the depth itself was different. As Myung continued to fight him, he keenly felt his own deficiency. He also was well aware which part he was lacking in. He had learned numerous times on how to handle weapons, but through them he never was enlightened or performed more in depth. I just need to fill up what I'm lacking. So he was planning to get the feel of it by looking at Oris's enlightenment. However, it was a question if Swell was going to show him that important book through a mere bet. Swell pondered for a moment before he nodded his head. Normally, high elves are able to read the enlightenment, but fortunately the decision is on me. If you truly win, I will show you Oris's enlightenment. Myung clenched his fist. If he could only see that enlightenment, a few bets were nothing. Although he didn't have much time, it was worth the investment. Then decide the next bet. After eating a handful of blue mushrooms, Swell took in a deep breath. Afterwards he spoke as his eyes twinkled. Hide. And I'll find you. It was a good thing he had lured the Sword Bone trio to a far location ahead of time. Myung became a pure northerly wind and melted into the land. In the end, Swell was unable to find Myung. The next bet was a treasure hunt. Each had to hide an item and needed to find each other's. By this time, even if he didn't want to connect it, it couldn't be helped but to be connected. There was certainly a connection with Merlin. If it wasn't true, there was no way that the repertoire would be this similar. And even on a similar bet, Merlin himself wasn't able to win against Myung. Swell was no different, and with a miserable face he declared a surrender. I lost. You aren't a normal Dakibi. Taken, who was standing in front of Myung, reacted. It seems like the stupid half-dragon has finally opened his eyes. Myung Azum. The one who reigns over all Dakibis. If you thought he was a normal Dakibi, then you're just admitting you're blind. As if Taken waited for this moment, he poured out sarcastic remarks. Then Swell's face seriously hardened. Was it because he was treated as a pet? He was a fellow with quite a grudge. However, Swell didn't scold Taken but spoke of Myung's identity. As if there was something that was bugging him. What's wrong? Are you Azura's champion? At the same time, Swell looked at Myung with piercing eyes. He still had a serious face. Myung could only be more serious. And Azura's champion were completely different positions. But he connected the two and was almost certain. Someone had informed him. It was appropriate to think this. If it wasn't true, how could he connect and Azura's champion? Even if he was to deny it, Swell was already half certain. Myung was able to know it. You're right. So he coolly acknowledged. If he was to deny it, it might lead to more suspicion. Of course, it might be different if Swell was a champion of another Deva Guardian, but Azura said he would know if he sees him. Myung wasn't able to feel any hint of the 8 Deva Guardians of Buddhism. Long ago, Ab*Tsij, known as the Garura's champion, visited. She said that when the appeared, he would be the Azura's champion. When was it? Myung's voice got heavier. Garura's champion. Garura made a name for himself as a bird that consumed a dragon. Like Azura, he was one of the 8 Deva Guardians of Buddhism, and if she's his champion, of course Myung was like an arch-rival. Up until now, he hadn't found one person, but in an unexpected place he found a clue. Even more, she was also aware that was going to visit him, like a foresight of the future. It was an extraordinary event. To be exact, 15 years and 38 days ago. As if it was nothing, Swell spoke of her as he looked through his stuff. And that B*Teach told me to give this to Azura's champion if he appeared. But as I lost the bet, I was waiting for you for 15 years. Since she was also the same B*Tch who gave me my first defeat. And he gave Muyang a small talisman. Seek life, instant death. Those who seek life shall die. On the talisman that was written. Muyang knitted his brows. Seek death, instant life. Seek life, instant death. Muyang also remembered the words left by Yi Sunshin. Those who seek death shall live and those who seek life shall die. However, the first part was missing and it was written that he was just going to die. As if she was predicting what was going to happen in the future. Do you know exactly who she was? B*TV. It felt like it was implied that the champion of Garura was a woman. And it didn't seem like Swell was fond of her much. However, he couldn't help but ask, and Swell spoke as he ground his teeth. A very white B*Teeth. Whiter than snow. Even I wasn't sure what kind of species she was. Just she had wings of both an angel and a devil. At the same time, Muyang's whole body was filled with faint quivers. Snow. It was impossible for some woman to have the wings of an angel and a devil besides her. In the future she was active as a saint, and as a woman who destroyed a demon king's army, every human knew of her achievement. However, there wasn't much known about Snow. Where she came from, what type of species she was, and what she was thinking. Just she suddenly appeared one day and helped humans. Even when humans gave her the title of saint, she acted the same. In the end, she died because of another demon king, but Snow was one of the few people who might have been able to change the battle. Snow is Garura's champion. Muyang couldn't help but grin. Muyang was able to face one of those truths about Snow that were hidden. Seek life, instant death. It was even written in Chinese characters that could only be recognized by humans. He gained greater curiosity. After the bet, where did the Garura's champion go? She said she was going to the altar. She said that the Azura's champion would understand. Phew. Swell let out a sigh. He had a face that showed he was finally able to finish the 15 years of waiting. The altar. There was an image that instantly popped in Muyang's head. Diablo's altar. You were able to earn the Diablos once you collected all 3 rings and conducted a ceremony. And to do this, there was an altar that clearly existed. I never that you would come visit me. You did seem to have some insight, but even that B*Teach didn't have the expression of complete certainty. At most, it was a 50-50 chance. Were you able to read her expression? Muyang was quite surprised. In the past, it wasn't like Muyang had never seen Snow. When she died, Muyang was nearby. But he wasn't able to read any emotion in Snow's expression. Even the mighty Muyang had no clue what she was thinking. It was hard to say she wasn't a truly colorless and odorless woman, but Swell said he could read her emotions. She had the expression as though she was about to cry. So that was why I was more angry with her. She won the bet but acted so naughty. For a moment he thought it might not be Snow, but in the end shook his head. There was no way another being would have the wings of an angel and a devil. Either way, I don't want to mention any more about her. Since you have also won the bet, take the item as I have promised. However, Oris's enlightenment isn't here. It is written on the world tree. Then I need to find the world tree. Even though Muyang knew already, he still asked. If Swell was to know that he came after knowing everything, there was a possibility that he might feel antipathy. There is no need to find it. I'm the gatekeeper for the world tree. Amazing. Are you surprised? Hoo. It seems like you haven't heard this from other elves. Swell was happy as if he had finally landed a blow. It was the effect of moderately pleasing Swell. Swell continued to talk. Everything that says the world tree is a tree is wrong. The world tree is no greater than a pathway to cross. Everything is inside it and also not. Finding the enlightenment that Oris left behind is purely your role. Tap. Beads of blood fell down. Swell slashed his own forefinger and the blood fell and wetted the floor. Then at the same time the surroundings shook and a line was created. The line was made up of light and like an aurora, it moved like a curtain and expressed unrecognizable magical powers. In reality it will only be for a moment of time, but you will be stuck there for a long time. Still, if you are okay with it, cross the line. Myung stood there as he looked at the line. And moved without delay. This is. He looked around. Once he crossed the line, the world changed. The place was a path with numerous information. Everything around it fell into pieces and only the line was enlarged and made an endless path. However, as there was an extensive amount of information, Myung's sense was pressed down as it is. Information, on the other hand, the storage of memory. And Myung was able to realize the true appearance of the being called the World Tree. The World Tree wasn't a tree but a storage where the world's information and memories were stored. That it was formed by using great existences as its soil. He was also able to understand why these things were needed. The underworld is a world like a sand castle. It seemed like these systems were built in order to sustain the sand castle-like underworld. So even if they said, it supports the world, the meaning wasn't greatly different. There were 6 like this. Just one among them, Myung only had a small taste of it, but already he felt confused. However, he also realized a way to find what he wanted. Oris. I will find his enlightenment. It was like the eye of the sky skill. He thought of the thing he wanted and followed the exact path. This place was a huge information gathering place that was a few hundred times bigger than the Sky Library. However, Myung didn't wander around and went straight forward. Shortly, a wall appeared and he found the sword trace written on it. The sword trace. The trace of a sword. The thing that was truly written by Oris was written very shortly on the wall. The trace looked like it was just scribbled with a sword, but that one short sword trace left Oris's enlightenment just as it was. However, just as a high-level artwork could be seen as a scribble to an observer, depending on who looked at Oris's sword trace, they might receive it completely differently. Myung breathed heavily. From the trace he was able to feel something overpowering. It felt like the weight would press down on him. He approached with difficulty and stretched his hands out and touched the sword trace. He felt like he could feel Oris's joys and sorrows. It's not about thinking with his head. This sword, this trace, Oris had compressed his life and placed it here. How could he think with his head and engrave such a thing? Myung took a step back. Swoosh. He took out anguish. Afterwards he closed his eyes and followed the sword trace by swinging anguish. However, he wasn't able to leave a trace like him. He followed the way the sword moved. He had never done this before. Swords were tools. Tools that were supposed to move depending on the user's consciousness. He thought the same when he earned the Immortal King's breastplate. However, even those tools stored their user's memory. They stored their user's movements. They stored everything about the user. Myung didn't know this. He just looked at them as tools that were merely swung and broke. He had never thought of the things that were stored inside. Now he thought he could understand a bit. Even why this was called anguish. Zing. The sword fell. To him the sound seemed like a mournful woman's cry. Gremory. This sword contained Gremory's memory. It was called anguish since it contained her anguish. Do demon gods also cry? Did demon gods also have sad emotions? He felt he would burst. Anguish shook Myung. If Gremory was in front of him, he wanted to rub her back and tell her to stop crying. That she was doing well and he wanted to compliment her. These emotions were new to him, something he had never felt before. If it was the usual Myung, he wouldn't even have those thoughts. Did you hear the sound of the sword? That's not all of his traces. Now listen to the sound of the world. He was able to hear a different voice. He knew who it was right away. The Black Shadow. The existence in his dreams whispered to him. He was even able to realize what his identity was. A master of darkness. One among the 11 beings, he was Kingslayer. Kingslayer was scolding him that he shouldn't be just listening to the sound of the sword through Oris's trace. He was mocking him as if Myung shouldn't be satisfied with just that much. Myung stopped the sword. He looked at the trace once more. Ah! If the black shadow didn't speak to him, he would have just passed by it. He wouldn't have realized that a more important meaning was in the sword trace. However, when he looked at it again, Myung's whole body couldn't be helped but quiver. It was because he realized that the identity of the huge oppressive feeling was the world. The world tree. The place where a world's memories are stored. And those traces of the world were left by Oris. Everything merged and forced Myung into shock. It was completely different from the time he heard the sound of anguish. Do not forget the memories of this place. Think once more about the sound of the world. If you do, I will. Like a voice in his dreams, it tickled his ears faintly. Nothing could enter his head anymore. His mind became weaker and all his rationality had died. The sound of the world was that massive. Myung hardened like a statue and just looked at the sword trace. However, the volume was too big and it was impossible to store everything. The struggle to store even one more. You could truly call it a struggle. One Lee Sun-shin, Admiral Lee Sun-shin, is very famous in Korea for his victories during the Imjin War against Japanese Navy. His quotes such as the one in the novel are well known in Korea. Sword Bone Trio. They were ones who were mad about swords and called themselves as swords. The three were brothers who didn't share the same blood but were tied together by a bond much stronger. Depending on their skills, they arranged themselves as Sword 1, Sword 2, and Sword 3, and among them Sword 1 had the powerful fighting power to be one of the top 10 humans. It was obvious that spirits couldn't flee from the Sword Bone Trio. It's strange. Sword 1 spoke with a completely expressionless face. It had been a few hours since he searched and followed the strange energy of a spirit. The answer was found when he thought about the movements and the location. Someone is purposely luring us. Hyungnim, is that true? There shouldn't be anyone who knows we are here, right? Sword 2 and Sword 3 replied one after the other. To think that they were being lured. There was no group bold enough to lure the great Sword Bone Trio. Sword 1 shook his head and spoke. It's not a person. This energy. I wasn't sure if I was right, but it resembles the monsters we saw in the ice wall. Slap. Sword 2 slapped his forehead and Sword 3 nodded his. If Sword 1 said so, then it was so. Sword 1 never made a mistake. His abilities, his pursuit, and in all other areas Sword 1 exceeded the two. There were three monsters they saw at the ice wall. A Dakibi, a Death Knight, and Cerberus. Sword 2 and Sword 3 couldn't help but grin. Although it was an alarming combination, they were no match for the Sword Bone Trio. Hyungnim, are those monsters after us? It doesn't seem like they lured us into a trap. Then, they are trying to make us stay as far away as possible. Those spirits are moving without a destination. The movements of the spirits were indeed all over the place. Without a special destination, their goals seemed to be to get them to move as far away as possible. At first he thought there was some sort of purpose, but he now could be certain. Sword 2 and Sword 3 suddenly grimaced. If they weren't after them and were just trying to get them just far away as possible, it was important to know why they would do such a thing. The World Tree. Hyungnim, do you think the monsters had something to do with the World Tree? As Sword 3 asked, Sword 1 answered in the affirmative. Didn't I mention it? The monsters probably understood it. Sword 1 did say that they needed to find the World Tree first in front of the ice wall. It was certain that they listened to him and tried to lure them away. There were only a few monsters that lived in this harsh land. As he went around, he was able to understand. There were much fewer monsters that were in the top rank. It meant that it wasn't a coincidence that they met in front of the ice wall. Ha! These bastards. I let them live in this. As Sword 2 ground his teeth, Sword 1 hastily spoke. We don't have time to waste. Sword 2 and Sword 3 sort the spirits. When we trace back the energy, there will be the source. We will track them inversely. Even if they found the energy, it wasn't easy to trace it. If they took some sort of measure or special body odor, it might have been easier, but there were only a few who could find a certain individual in this vast northern land with just energy. And Sword 1 was one of the few people who could. After 2 days they found a cave. A place where he could feel not just spirits but a more underlying strength. It's this place. Sword One was certain. And his certainty was right. When he entered the place, an elf popped out. This isn't a place you guys can enter without permission. Get lost. Half-dragon-type species swell. He had shown himself. However, a strong energy that even stung his skin popped out from the sword bone trio. They didn't hide it. It meant that they were that much confident in their abilities. Elf Swell. The gatekeeper of the world tree. Correct. As Sword One spoke as if he was reading from a book, Swell raged. Even if you know it, you emit such a threatening energy. In front of me, Swell, who has the blood of a high elf and an ancient dragon. Thump. Vivshik. A huge compelling power was activated. Dragon's words. Although he might be only half-dragon, an ancient dragon's words were heavy. Gaul. Hoa. As Sword One screamed, the energy of the dragon's words instantly reduced to half. It was Buddhist preaching known as the lion's roar. The voice contained the strength of a wave that could instantly drive out bad energy. Thanks to it, the three didn't even budge an inch. Hyungnim, if he is this strong, he would probably be one of the strongest dragons we have hunted. Not a transcendental species. Don't kill it. The trio wasn't nervous at all. It was because this wasn't the first time they faced a dragon. Dragon hunters. They all accomplished that achievement. And he learned mental fortitude discipline, a way to build inner energy, and was able to resist strongly against dragon's words. As the lion's roar was also added, Swell's existence was endlessly lowered. That had attained Swell's wrath. You guys will not die so peacefully. As humans, you guys dare to talk about hunting in front of a noble existence. Around Swell's body, fire and ice soared like small dragon waves. Then the two became a spear and a shield. A sort of fire and an ice shield. The fire boiled like hellish flames that would burn everything, and the ice was completely hard as if it could freeze and stop anything. Then numerous ice spirits gathered around Swell. With Swell in the middle, a large radiance quickly froze and melted repeatedly. The sword bone trio quickly spread apart. They occupied 3 different directions and at the same time, they fixed their swords on the ground. Then with a zing sound, the 3 swords started to resonate. Commence hunting. Then at the moment Sword One began to talk. The 3 pressured Swell like a fierce storm unlike anything else. Playing. See. Greed has been activated. Wicked God's sword has been absorbed. Name, Anguish. Rank, A++. Classification, equipable type. Durability, 117,888, unrepairable. Effect, sword with Grimoire's Anguish. Currently the special condition has been opened. Asterisk ability to steal blood from the opponent and recover the stamina of the user. Asterisk greed sword absorption. From the absorbed sword, it brings everything over including its durability. Asterisk strength plus 15. Asterisk fighting aura plus 30. Asterisk cry of battle. Asterisk ogre's cruelty. Young went back. He was able to hear the sound of the sword and the sound of the world, but once he turned around he couldn't remember anything. However, it was crystal clear that he had to return and pass the line. If I was to continue staying here, I would be swallowed up. The world tree was normally a storage for information and memories. There was a massive amount of information that Muyang couldn't contain. If he was to continue to stay there, he would be eaten up by that information. Muyang himself would become an information wanderer inside the world tree. Before all his reason collapsed, he needed to find the line. Like a homing instinct, Muyang returned the way he came. And the moment he passed the line, he was able to see the cave half collapsed. There was a battle. A battle that could destroy half of a huge cave. It wasn't a normal battle. It was obvious that an opponent strong enough for Swell to act had appeared. The sword bone trio. Muyang woke his mind. He quickly looked around and followed the remains of the battle. And outside of the cave he was able to find Swell with his blood spread all over the place. Maybe it's because he's mixed blood, but it's quite difficult to fight. Brother, rest for a bit. If it wasn't for Brother Sword 2, I would have died. The Sword Bone trio were at the location where Swell had fallen. Among them, one was quite seriously injured, his arm and leg like rags. However, the other two were comparably fine. At that moment, Sword 1 found Mu-young and spoke. It's the guy who lured us. Mu-young held Anguish tightly. He instinctively realized that it would be hard to win. However, it wasn't avoidable. What a waste of time. His mind wasn't organized yet. He heard the sound of the sword, but he wasn't able to remember the sound of the world. However, the opponent didn't seem like he was going to give him time. The Sword Bone trio. Especially Sword 1, he tried his best even at killing a weakling. They had the same kind of scent. However, it was hard to anticipate someone's help. Taken was half destroyed and was lying near Swell, and even if he had the Hellhorse help, his chance of victory would be very small. It wouldn't be easy to even escape. However, his mind was blank. He tried to wake his mind up, but it continued to be in a vacant state. The sound of the world. It was the words that rang in his mind. He needed to remember it again. If he did, he felt like he could overcome this situation. Sword 1, Hyungnim, I'll kill him. Just stay and rest. Sword 2, it will be difficult to face him after spending all your stamina. You will go with me. Welp, as expected, I can't hide anything from you. Sword 2 shrugged his shoulders and took out his sword. At the same time, Sword 1 made a jump towards Mu-young first. Swoosh swoosh. Plang. Although Mu-young managed to block him, he bit his lips. Truly top 10 humans. From just one contact he could understand the difference. However, he didn't have any time to rest. Sword 1, who figured out their difference in one stroke, started to swing his sword indiscriminatingly. Plang. Plank. Cough. On top, Mu-young's body wasn't normal. The world tree. Maybe because he crossed the sea of information, but his body was in a vulnerable condition to external attacks. The sound of the world. What in the world was that? Nevertheless, what was this strange tone that rings in his head? He needed to remember. Oris, who divided the world. What was Mu-young trying to do with the trace Oris left behind? 2. He wasn't a big deal. Sword 2 spat out. As Mu-young didn't even fight back, his excitement cooled down. Moment by moment, Mu-young was cornered by his opponents. Even if Mu-young was to only focus on blocking, he would soon reach his limit. However, Mu-young didn't care. He even forgot that he was focusing on blocking. He had remembered. The true meaning behind the trace Oris left behind. The sound of the world. But it was too late. Sword 1's sword specifically focused on Mu-young's middle of his forehead and headed for it. That sword, Mu-young knew that he couldn't stop it. Sword 1's swordsmanship was one level higher than Mu-young's. He was certainly a man who was mad about swords. How could Mu-young stop the sword that was headed towards him? Then, at that moment, the unexpected occurred. With a dull sound, Sword 1 and Sword 2 bounced off. Ka. Ugh. It was such a strong attack that Sword 1 and Sword 2, both who were now embedded in the wall, vomited blood. With just one hit they received an internal injury. Sword 2 even lost consciousness. It wasn't possible. With just one contact to make the two bounce off and cause internal damage. Sword 1 always wrapped his body with a strong energy shield. The strong energy shield meant an armor made of energy which made swords useless. Any rank or lower magic had no effect. But with just one contact it pierced the strong energy shield. Also, Sword 1 was able to understand as he placed all his strength on his attack. How strong the attack was that made him bounce off. Master. His whole body trembled. However, this attack didn't come from the Dakibi Mu-young. Sword 1 raised his head. Ha. It's the first time I feel the air of the underworld. And there was one existence. Formless. Uncounterable. Truly a man who was well fitted with the word impossible. A monster on another level. He whose silver armor, silver helmet, and a single sword were his life. Mu-young was able to figure who he was as soon as he saw him. King Slayer. An existence of the darkness had arrived in the underworld. But how? Two different worlds were connected. It was because of Mu-young. It was because Mu-young himself had heard the sound of the world itself that King Slayer was able to come to the underworld. King Slayer looked at Mu-young and slowly raised his sword. Look carefully. This is a sword. Clang. Sword 1 ran towards him. It was in an instant. With movements like flashes of lightning, he aimed for King Slayer's throat. But he wasn't holding a sword. In his hand, a condensed energy soared up like a sword. Sword stars. A formless sword made by condensed energy. A move that is known to be sharper than any sword. It was a skill beyond unique, that only a select few among the 5 great clans could use. Whatever touched the sword stars, no matter if it was steel, it was sliced like tofu. At least from Mu-young's understanding it was so. However, it was blocked. That wasn't all. The sword stars were cut off. Ow! Sword 1 murmured as he looked at his hand, unable to believe that it was sliced off through the sword stars. It was impossible. On top of that, the sword King Slayer used wasn't even special. It was a long great sword, but he couldn't feel any type of energy. It wasn't even covered by King Slayer's power. It just sliced. And his hand was sliced off. Grains exist in all the things in the world. Seek slowness and look at the grains. Then there won't be anything you can't slice. King Slayer posed for the next movement. I will show you the strength of those who you need to face. In front of the top 10 humans, Mu-young was no different than a young child. Right away, Mu-young realized what King Slayer was talking about. Demon God. King Slayer was trying to teach him the true power the 72 demon gods had. It was to show him that the opponent he needed to face wasn't the humans who were in front of him. My entire life has been about swords. 56 years. I will not acknowledge you. Sword 1 ground his teeth. He seared his wound, and with the other hand he once again extracted sword stars. Sword bone. Those who were crazy about swords. It was obvious his pride about handling swords would rend the skies. That pride, that title as one of the top 10 humans, were being toyed with. Heat shimmers started to form on Sword 1's whole body. He was using his life and turning it into his strength. It was a desperate determination to kill his opponent and himself. He's fast. Sword 1 accelerated at a speed which Mu-young couldn't catch with his vision. It looked like he had one sword. But within it there were dozens of sword strikes. However, King Slayer didn't move a step. Like child's play, he blocked all of Sword 1's sword strikes and attacked the weak points of all the sword stars' attacks. All of his attacks weren't just blocked, they were destroyed. It isn't possible, this isn't possible. What was sword stars? It was a move he gathered to be perfect and simplified. The one swordsmanship he completed by being the experimental subject of numerous martial experts for many years. He had mastered it better than anyone else, so there shouldn't be a gap. But there was. As if there was nothing perfect in this world, he pierced it. On top of it all, it wasn't even swordsmanship. There was no structure. It ignored all pathways of basic swordsmanship. He couldn't accept it. For someone who doesn't follow the structure of swordsmanship to exist. However, on the other hand, Sword 1 couldn't stop King Slayer's attacks. Slow sword. Sword 1 also couldn't stop the sword that attacked Mu-young numerous times. Brr. Mu-young shuddered. King Slayer. Felt like he could also modify time. His own world in a completely different time. It wasn't even destructive. Normally, attacks from strong people tend to destroy everything in their surroundings. However, King Slayer focused everything to a single point. With pure swordsmanship, he overturned reason and truth. Just calmly stab and destroy the opponent. A sky above a sky. This was what a sky above a sky would be like. Even if Mu-young was at his prime state, he wouldn't be his opponent. Even if it was Mu-young, he couldn't cut the sky. And King Slayer was currently showing Mu-young who he needed to face in the future. To cut the sky. To kill gods. Not long after, Sword One's head soared away into the sky. This was an unusual scene, but Muyang found enlightenment every time Kingslayer moved. His body shivers died down. Muyang sat down and closed his eyes. He reviewed Kingslayer's movements and tried to bear a similarity to his slowness. Eventually, a change occurred to Muyang's body. Above his head, a red snake-like haze rose. The red snake circled around Muyang before it penetrated his head. It was the gem of the sage. It reacted to the dragon's heart and changed into that a similar form. Also, the red snake was the world which Muyang saw. It was a form based on the sound he heard from the place and Kingslayer's movements. However, it was dangerous. Muyang knitted his brows. If he was to overstrain himself and try to accept everything, he could lose it all as a consequence. Kingslayer approached Muyang. Then he placed his hand on Muyang's forehead. Then slowly Muyang's expression brightened. "Congratulations." Kingslayer spoke briefly. The red snake became a red dragon and slowly went around Muyang. Once again his body started to reconstruct. When Muyang opened his eyes, he was inside a cave. He felt like he had just dreamt a long dream. The destroyed cave was restored and Swell was looking at someone with a very nervous face. "You're up." Kingslayer. It wasn't a dream. With his silver-colored helmet and armor on, he greeted Muyang. "Enig." Right beside him, the hell horse was also with them. It was nagging at its owner who it hadn't met in a while. Muyang tried to get up but placed his hand on the floor. His entire body had no strength. "Don't push yourself. You have overcome a great wall. You will need to recuperate a few more days." Kingslayer advised him. "A great wall." Muyang nodded his head. He faintly remembered how he overcame another wall. "I saw a red dragon." Swordmaster's wall starts with you being able to see that snake. If what you saw wasn't a snake but a dragon, you could become a much stronger being than the Swordmaster. How did it appear? It was a short question, but it contained a lot more connotation. Kingslayer got up and clasped his hands behind his back. "I'm the main body but not the main body. To be exact, you could say that I'm a part of a memory from the world tree." "Didn't you call me?" "I did." Muyang knitted his brows. He instinctively called Kingslayer after listening to the sound of the world. Kingslayer spoke. "I can't stay long in this current world. For the next 7 days I will show you my sword. Your task is to absorb it all." It was an announcement. For Muyang to just watch and take in. Kingslayer spoke as if it couldn't be helped that Muyang wouldn't be able to discern it all. Muyang heavily nodded. Then he looked at Swell. Swell was strangely keeping in check with Kingslayer. "My master said that the Masters of Darkness couldn't come out. If they did, a grave catastrophe would occur. But as you came out to the underworld, what are you going to do from now on? Did you come to the underworld just to teach that Dakibi?" Surprisingly, Swell knew about the Masters of the Darkness. Swell, who was full of pride, spoke politely. "Merlin, that half-devil? Do not speak of him that way. Master hates evil more than anyone else. I don't care what happens to the world." Kingslayer shrugged his shoulders. His sword didn't have any trace of hatred or revenge. He had already risen above it all. This might not be true for other Masters of the Darkness, but it was true for Kingslayer. Instead, he just wanted to see the future of Muyang. Muyang said that he would not break. Truly, up until now he showed no sign of wavering. That was why he was more interested. Then, "Do you know that Merlin tried to make the person in front of you his disciple? Is that true?" Swell widened his eyes. He made a look as if he couldn't believe it even if he looked at Muyang. "Merlin hated evil. I'm not fond of evil either. However, different from Merlin, I don't care which path he takes." Swell's eyes were blurred with conflict. If a person taught by Kingslayer was to follow a truly evil path, it would indeed be nothing different than a catastrophe. He started to think about if he needed to stop them from potentially becoming master and pupil. Of course, he wasn't certain if Kingslayer would remain a spectator. At least he couldn't just stand and watch evil rage before his eyes. Then Muyang raised his head. There was something else that bothered him more than the relationship between Swell and Merlin. Why were they after the World Tree? The past had changed. There was no reason for the Sword-Bone trio to look for the World Tree now. If Muyang didn't come looking for it, the World Tree would have been robbed. The owner of Oris's throne would have also changed. Swell answered as he clicked his tongue. They were after the spirits of the World Tree. There is no way humans would have known about the spirits of the World Tree, so they probably awoke the ancient darkness spirits. They had the similar scent as them. The ancient darkness spirits? The darkness spirits were even forbidden in ancient times. And if the ancient darkness spirits were to eat up the spirits of the World Tree, they would obtain a power of a half-god. However, ancient darkness spirits should all be sealed up. For mere humans to wake them, it isn't easily believable. As if he couldn't understand, Swell shook his head as his expression hardened. Even from his position, something unusual had occurred. Asterisk. Kirak. From a dark secret room, a man screamed out loud. His hair turned white and from his mouth saliva drooled out. His whole body was tied up by chains and behind his back, a huge black heart was throbbing. Kayayawak. Every time the heart pumped, he let out a scream. As the heart throbbed, dark powers crazily flooded out. Everything in the surroundings encroached with darkness as it showed traces of a curse. A man without both of his arms. From his body, from all of his holes, black tentacles stretched out. Moment by moment, it swallowed up living things, and as it did, the black heart moved more rapidly. Disordered terror. Quite a name for a spirit. There was a man who looked at it from afar. The head of the lawless clan, Lawless Gene. Few thousands of warriors, among them the man on top. He was looking at it with interest. Will the Sword-Bone trio really be able to bring the spirits of the World Tree? And behind Lawless Gene, a man who wore a white coat spoke. Lawless Gene answered. If it's the three, they can even face a transcendental being. If they are able to bring the spirits of the World Tree, we gain a weapon that has the power of a half-god. A tip of Lawless Gene's lip went up. If they were able to control the power of a half-god, they would have a very strong secret weapon. But the host wouldn't be able to withstand for long. Do everything to keep him alive. Out of 1,000 candidates, he was the only one who stayed alive. It would be hard to find a host who is more fit for the disordered terror. I am trying my best. All right. You must try your best. If we want to become the only clan and not the 5 great clans. Lawless Gene clenched his fist. The disordered terror will be the cornerstone for them to become the only clan. T was no different than a nuclear bomb, a weapon none would have an answer to. Now it didn't seem like that place was far. Gwa Arik. The man without both arms screamed more desperately. He was Bei Susie's father. Mister, are you really gonna leave? Kim Taehwan. The young man with a bright future, the one who has the shield of eradication and the unique class, the guardian of eradication. Most people thought of him that way. He was at the Blue Temple with Muyang and accomplished quite a significant number of things following him. In reality, Kim Taehwan's results were surprising among the rookies. I must go. I can't just leave my daughter be. Bei Susie's father, Bei Sungmin, spoke. Likewise, he was also from the same temple as Muyang, the Blue Temple, but he lost his both arms and barely survived until now through the support of his daughter, Bei Susie. However, his daughter Bei Susie was kidnapped by the Fighting King. Right in front of his eyes. He couldn't imagine a life without Bei Susie. In this world, Bei Susie was Bei Sungmin's only family member. A treasure worth more than anything else. The apple of his eye? It wasn't even at that level. Just by looking at her he felt alive. After Bei Susie was kidnapped, he felt like the sky fell down. Even now he could clearly see the situation at that time when he closed his eyes. When he dreamt, Susie reproached him for not being able to save her. It was a continuation of days of wanting to die. But he couldn't. At least, Susie must be saved. That was why, like Muyang suggested, he went up the Sky Library and mastered the study of the darkness spirit. Are you really all right? I know what you're worried about. However, I am able to protect my own body. Although I don't have both arms, I can substitute them. As Bei Sungmin smiled, haze appeared on both sides of his empty arms. It's amazing every time I see it. How it's a darkness spirit, but it produces a shining feeling. Kim Tae-hwan glanced at the haze with wonder. Certainly, the darkness spirits didn't fit the name. However, that was because of Bei Susie's lineage of light skill she learned. Lineage was something passed on by blood. Even to Susie's father, a similar effect would have been left. Since he was her only family, that effect would have appeared more strongly. As the two didn't know of this truth, they couldn't help but find it odd. By the way, are you really thinking of entering that guild? Yes, I'm going to enter the Glow Guild. Like the Sun Guild, the Glow Guild was also one of the 9 great guilds. At that place, they proposed a deal to Tae-hwan and Tae-hwan accepted it. At first he was planning to start a guild himself, but as Mu-young and all other key members left, it was a decision that couldn't be helped. Tae-hwan's face hardened as he continued to talk. I'm going to go in and change it. From the inside. I'm going to stop the few guilds and clans from dominating and change this selfish humankind. I will make a world where it is no longer strange to combine strength. Didn't we also accomplish it? True, if it's you, it can be done. I trust you. Watch me. The current association is too chauvinistic and so became rotten. Though it wasn't a long time since we've arrived, I understand. That if we go on like this, that we will eventually be destroyed. But within it there should surely be people with the same thought as me. I will work my way up and change it. It was his promise to himself. Sungmin nodded his head. When we meet again, I hope it does happen. Mr. K, please come back in good health. Their eyes met. That was how the two promised to meet again in the future before they parted ways. Sungmin roamed about aimlessly. As he followed the Fighting King's footsteps, his skills also improved. The weak died in this world. Only the strong could achieve what they want. It was one of Mu-young's sayings which he heard enough about. Then coincidentally he entered the city of elves. The elves were amazingly kind. If they were normal darkness spirits, they would have excluded Sungmin, but Sungmin dealt with light-type spirits. Elves welcomed Sungmin, a spirit master who managed that sort of spirits. And through the help of the elves, Sungmin's skills improved each day. It could be said that it was a steep rise, since he was able to instantly make both arms and was able to attack and block. However, he couldn't just continue to stay with the elves. With a lot of stories, Sungmin left, and was caught by the Lawless clan. He was forced to become the host of the forbidden ancient darkness spirit, Disordered Terror. Afterwards he had no memory. Just pain and hate. Kayak. Are the Sword Bone Trio not here yet? Lawless Jean angrily yelled. It had been already 3 months since the Sword Bone Trio left the Lawless clan. They should have already entered the demon god's territory and achieved their goal. However, there was no news of them. Nothing. A man beside him wearing a white coat started to speak as he was taken back. We can't get in touch. It has already been a week. How does that make sense? Are you saying that something happened to the Sword Bone Trio? That. It didn't make sense. The trio was quite capable of even facing a transcendental being. Of course, since it was the demon god's territory, no one could be assured of the place, and a transcendental being like monster could be common. Lawless Jean tapped his chin. If the Disordered Terror goes wild, the damage would grow out of control. Do you know of this? There is a way. There is a way. As Lawless Jean looked at him with doubtful eyes, the man with the white coat swallowed his saliva. We didn't just cultivate the Disordered Terror. The host wouldn't withstand it. That host has a strength to resist the Disordered Terror. If we feed him a spirit that weakens the strength of the Disordered Terror, we could suppress it temporarily. Suppress it. Suppress it. Lawless Jean pondered for a moment before he nodded his head. There were many spirits they were cultivating. Among them, the Disordered Terror was the most superior, But there was something quite useful among the spirits of opposite tendency. Give him the armful's cradle. Isn't it a spirit that isn't fully cultivated? Either way, there isn't another spirit that could suppress the strength of the disordered terror. Since it has both armful and cradle in its name, it probably could suppress the strength of the disordered terror. First, weaken its strength before making a new plan. They needed to first take care of this most urgent problem. I understand. The man with the white coat heavily nodded. The two spirits were too great of an existence for a person to take in. But he said to mix the two spirits at once. No one could predict what would happen next. Kingslayer's movements were infinitely slowed. Each move, one by one, Muyang just watched as if he was dissecting them. A week had passed. His sense of time had become weird. Slowly the world became slower. It was a slightly different feeling than when he used acceleration. He couldn't explain it in words, but it felt like the world that Kingslayer saw. Slowly and more perfectly. At most 128 times. Kingslayer was able to move in a world at most 128 times slower. It was the conclusion he made after watching him for a full week. His eyes couldn't help but to widen. Even for acceleration, 2 times was the limit. And even that was usually only available in equipment over a rank. However, Kingslayer ruled over an area. Within a specific area he could manage time freely. Everything was placed below his hands. The thing that made it possible for him to read the grains of area and time. And in the center, there was a sword. He started to see in full detail. He was understanding Kingslayer's movements. Why he needed to move slowly. It was to look at the grains of all things in the world. With only this strength he didn't overlook the world. He tried to kill all the kings and create a new world. I just stepped into the world of swords. He was embarrassed of himself for being confident in his swordsmanship. It was like Muyang just stepped into the world of swords. However, he was satisfied with being able to just see potential. He couldn't see it all, but it was important that he could see bits. It was a small enlightenment. This also led to changes in Muyang's body. Gem of the Sage has melted further into your body. Muyang grasped his shaking arm. His heart beat rapidly and produced strength. Moment by moment, it was a continuation of development for Muyang. That had occurred for a week already. To check what had changed, he turned to his status viewer. Achievement effect dash. Dragon Hunter. A+++. Dragon's Enemy. Gremmary's Anguish. A+. +5 to all abilities. Sets dash. Strength 255, 147 plus 108. Agility 232, 143 plus 89. Stamina 266, 136 plus 130. Intelligence 230, 141 plus 89. Wisdom 211, 142 plus 69. Fighting Aura 202, 102 plus 100. Magic Resistance 250, 90 plus 160. Spirit Ability 150, 90 plus 60. Besides Spirit Ability, all stats were above 200. Due to the heart of the Dark Dragon Barca, his pure stats had greatly increased. If it was like this, he basically had the strength of an elite in a huge guild. I need to get stronger. However, Muyang couldn't be satisfied. He faced enemies on the level of Kingslayer, a super strong being. How could he be pleased with just this much? But he couldn't hurry. Following the grains, slowly moving to become the absolute of all things in the world. You can now see grains. Kingslayer spoke as if he was quite surprised. It seemed like he wasn't even certain if Muyang could learn to see the grains in just a week. Swoosh. Muyang slowly took out Anguish. If a person sees the grains for the first time, they would be oppressed by the grand and vast strength. Up for a fight. Kingslayer willingly started the last fight. After taking out his great sword, he continued to talk. The sword that you hold. Its strength isn't fully obtained. You mean there are other functions? Did you find the Star of David? As Muyang nodded, Kingslayer continued to talk. The Star of David was a place created when the demon gods were born. What that means is that the sword isn't small. If it was a sword in the place of the core, depending on what you do with it, it could even be a sword that could cut through a demon god. Myung looked at Anguish. For it to be able to cut through a demon god. However, it was now an A+ rank sword. If it absorbs other swords, it might be possible someday, but currently it was a long way to go. There is that much underlying strength? Of course, he couldn't easily believe it. Although it could absorb swords, every weapon has its own limit and class. If it could cut through gods, it must be above S rank. If it's an EX rank sword, which was not seen by any human but was used by demon god Baal, who held the first seat, it could easily cut through any and all demon gods. But Myung was skeptical whether or not Anguish could develop that much. However, there was no reason for Kingslayer to lie either. He was truly a master of swords. He was able to figure out strengths which Myung could not see. And it was at that moment when Myung was finding a new aspect of Anguish. Myung momentarily knitted his brows. There was a video that passed by his head. A video of a huge lump of flesh that recklessly massacred a city as it became loose. It was plastered with eyeballs, and from its huge mouth, there was an endless division of light. So people were unable to easily approach it. It was truly like a bomb, and if they were to approach it, there was a highly likely chance that it would disappear with the city. Soon, the lump of flesh spurted feathers of a bird and then flew off far away. However, for some reason it was a familiar figure. Bae Suzy's father. Myung nodded his head. If it was Bae Sungmin, there was a time when he made a contract of death with Myung. He didn't want to become Suzy's baggage and so asked Myung to find a way to become stronger. As in exchange, Myung had told him about a skill he could earn from the Sky Library. But for him to turn into that form, it felt strange. He probably became a victim of an experiment. He probably turned into that form due to reckless experiments performed by eccentrics. As there were quite a few people who performed cruel experiments with the grounds that it was for a great cause. However, if he became an undead through the contract of death, it would be in an enhanced form. Originally, he was supposed to become a normal undead, but it seemed like its madness and division was preventing it. However, Myung knew what that lump of flesh's original form was. The contract of death was still fully activated. Just that although it was activated due to a lot of things being jumbled up, something weird came. At the roots of that lump of flesh there was a lich. As a top-rank monster, it wasn't weird at all to call it a one-man army. But he couldn't say it was a normal lich. Light and darkness coexisted, and it was divided infinitely. It was to a degree where it was understandable for it to pop at any time. Where was it headed? The lump of flesh. The disordered terror spread its long wings and started to head towards a certain place. It flew by, jumping from space to space. Even the strong men who followed it didn't risk it. It wasn't in their interest to tragically die with it. Nest. It's trying to make a nest. Myung anticipated the disordered terror's next move. Even if it was mixed, it didn't seem like the lich's trait disappeared. A lich was a monster that was known as an army unto itself. If it was to start being active, it would produce numerous problems. Can we start now? Kingslayer asked. After noticing Myung's change, he had just stood there. However, he also wasn't relaxed. Today was the last day. Afterwards, he had to leave Myung to do the things he needed to. Swoosh. Myung took the initiative. He moved his feet, and following the grains of the wind, he went in towards Kingslayer's chest slowly but accurately. The time Myung had now was more important than anything else. He was growing every minute, every second. Myung also knew this very well. It was okay to think about the disordered terror afterwards. Kingslayer was surprised. He couldn't be helped but be surprised. The speed in which Myung learned was beyond one's imaginations. Even if you started from scratch, it would still be slower than this. After realizing his own problems, he had been growing day by day. He tossed his original swordsmanship and was taking a step forward. Just by watching. He could see the grains, feel them, and correctly figure them out. Was this really possible in a week? It wasn't normal. Even himself, a master of darkness, felt this way. If he was to fight against the demon gods, this speed was a must, but it was a development speed that even freaked out Kingslayer. It's too bad. Kingslayer smacked his lips. It wasn't important to him if Muyang was evil or good. What he wished to see was whether or not Muyang would break after gaining his strength. However, after teaching him for a week, he felt a bit sad. It was because if he had a bit more time, he would have shown him more of the skills he had. It didn't seem like a bad idea to watch Muyang quickly learn and get stronger. A master and pupil relationship. Am I trying to become a teacher? He laughed quietly. Although it was only 1 week, that was enough to make his heart flutter for a while. As if he remembered a memory which he forgot for a very long time, it made him smile. If he had a pupil like Muyang, it would be a pain, but wouldn't it be great as it is? But that would only be possible if he was to overcome the difference in time and world. It seemed he needed to be satisfied with just the 1 week. Mia. Late at night. A day where the moonlight was in the middle of the sky. The hell horse came down and mournfully cried. He rubbed his face against Kingslayer as if begging Kingslayer to take him with him. However, Kingslayer was determined. Don't avoid a fight with him. Kingslayer was understanding of the relationship between Muyang and the hell horse. Even what Muyang was after. Before his last favor, he was going to overpower the hell horse. And to be at that level, he wasn't that far. Kingslayer looked up at the sky. I need to find out what this twist will bring. Demon gods. Whatever Baal is planning, here is something that the masters of darkness are unaware of. It was unusual. For now, everything seemed to be nothing more than a flap of butterfly wings, but he couldn't know of what that would lead to in the future. So before they really start, he needed to know about them. He couldn't just stay not knowing anything and get caught off guard. It is this world's Solomon's law, that the masters of darkness can't interfere. Have you forgotten? That moment, Swell approached with only common courtesy. Swell was full of pride about his bloodline, but a master of darkness? His existence alone was sufficient enough to be treated well. I know. If you really think about it, it was against the law to teach him yourself for a week. I don't know why everyone else let that pass, but if you go any further it will be dangerous. The other masters of darkness remained idle at Kingslayer's actions. It shouldn't be possible, but it was, as it involved Kingslayer. The noblest one. Since even the masters of darkness respected him. Swell might not be aware of this, but either way, doing more than this was dangerous. If the laws of the world get tangled, there was a possibility that his existence itself could disappear. Oris spoke Hitomi. To be exact, as I traced back the memories of the world tree, there was a message left by him. The world will be twisted once, and that twists will produce illness. Stop the prevalence of illness. He must have seen something we didn't. Oris. The leading role that led the Twilight era when the elves were most powerful. It was told that he was a strong being who almost reached the level of a half-god. On top, he had the insight to read the stars and see the future. If he said illness, it would mean evil. And only the demon gods were pure evil. It might be linked to the demon gods' movements, which Kingslayer felt strange about. So are you saying you will ignore the law? Swell's hostility towards him was beyond description. Masters of darkness needed to be examples, role models of Solomon's law. However, currently, that existence was trying to break the law. Once again, Kingslayer looked towards Muyang. After an intense fight, Muyang passed out. He purposely made him pass out. It was to quietly leave him. He spoke quietly. Don't I need to buy time for you to bloom? Wouldn't he need to leave behind hope after the epidemic? ******. Twilight Village existed on the outskirts of the great city. As a small village with a population of about 3,000 people, it was located at the edge of a cliff. Like all villages and cities, their main source of income was hunting and farming. They had a bit more affection than the great city, and also strong people frequently visited the Twilight Village to lay low. The mountain is dried up. Sheet. The great city will also be chaotic. What should we do? We would die if we stay here like this. There is a limit with just us. And to enter the Twilight Village, you needed to pass over a small mountain range. The problem was that the entire mountain range was full of monsters. And it was a problem since they weren't just normal monsters but undead. So, everyone gathered in the center of the village and continued to have a furious debate. Help from other cities? They are all passive. I think it happened near the great city, but no one knows of the details. Meaning the sheet they made blocked that mountain range. Twilight Village was in a remote place. The mountain range was dangerous and it was an awkward place to enter with mass military forces. On top, there were no groups that actively tried to get rid of the unknown cause of the undead. It was because if they weren't careful and were to bother a lich, they wouldn't get the chance to regret their actions. So, are we going to stay here and get attacked? If we get their help, it might be possible to break through and leave this place. But what of our honor? Don't. First, let's try to take care of it on our own. The people they talked about were the strong people who were laying low. However, the strong people who laid low were a help to the city just by staying. The reason why the Twilight Village could exist without being reliant on another place was all thanks to them. Even more like a rite of passage, they spent loads of their wealth while they stayed in the village. I was wondering why it was so loud in here. Seems like you need some help? Unexpectedly, a big figure appeared in the debate room. Amon. Amon. Amon of blood and iron. Those who saw him widened their eyes. Amon of blood and iron was a very prideful soldier. A man who was strong enough to be considered as one of the strong people. He also was laying low in this place. I was actually observing the problem in the mountain range. We probably need to do something before the area of undead broadens. A few people, including myself, should be able to handle them. Amon was confident. In reality, there were a few strong people who were willing to help him. If they were to work together with the village people, it didn't seem like a bunch of undead would be a problem. If you would step up for us, there is no more reason to be concerned. However, would it be okay? There wouldn't be much we could give as payment. I don't need it. I just want to live a quiet life. Amon placed his great sword over his shoulder. And his appearance exuded the aura of someone dependable. 50 strong and quick men. And prepare a week's worth of food and water. It's been a while since I hunted undead. Amon smiled. The next day, about 60 men left the village. And they didn't come back. A month. The village was isolated. Most men who left the village to hunt the undead never came back. No, there were times when they did come back. They came back as undead and attacked the village. It seemed certain that they would be defeated. The once lively village was now full of cries of the dead. There were times when other villages said they would help, but they weren't able to break through the mountain range. For Twilight Village there was no hope. It was tough enough to stop the undead that attacked every day. When they hit the walls, they were splintered further, infinitely repeating itself. However, it didn't seem like it would withstand for long. Ding ding. The bell rung. It meant that someone was close to the wall. Late at night, everyone rubbed their eyes as they got up from their spot. Since they lacked men, even women had to be on guard at night. Those who were protecting the wall were all tensed up. Undead invaded every 2 to 3 days. Every time they invaded, they ranged from a few dozen to a few hundred. But not this time. There was only one undead that invaded. However, something was odd. The undead wore a robe that covered his whole body and brought along a wagon, and it was full of faces of undead. And they were all faces they were well aware of. Amon. It's Amon's face. Has. My son has. All. Everyone wailed as they focused their arrows towards the undead. Then the undead took off his robe. Undead. It looks like a person. You can feel the liveliness from the face. He went over the mountain range? Wait, isn't that a fairy? As if they couldn't believe what they were seeing, they looked at the man. It was amazing for the man to come over the mountain range, but he even had a fairy that flew around him. Open it. The ultimate expressionless face. The man spoke with a tone that made them feel chills.